Health and transportation are the two big buckets when you think about reasons students miss school.
In the 21-22 school year, the average starting teacher salary in Michigan was only $39,000. And that is a number that ranked us dead last in the Great Lakes states.
There have been, bumping of heads between traditional public schools and charter schools. But when it comes down to providing resources and supports to students, what I find is that is the commonality.
Those were some of the voices of the thinkers and the community members we speak to every day here on the Metro. Welcome back to the show. I'm Robin Vincent. Michigan's education engine is sputtering. A new report illustrates how much schools have stalled since the pandemic. According to EdTrust Midwest, Michigan ranks near the bottom nationwide in how it funds students from low-income families. Student learning, meanwhile, is stuck in a slow recovery following the virtual school days of COVID-19. The 2025 State of Michigan Education Report released today shows big gaps in reading and math scores. Students from low-income backgrounds, students with disabilities, and Black and Latino students are all falling far behind. Now, at the same time, federal support for public schools may be on the chopping block. And that's why a bipartisan group of Michigan leaders says now is the time to act. They're calling for more investment, more accountability, and a concrete plan to support Michigan's most vulnerable kids. So what does this moment demand? And what happens if Michigan misses it? To answer these questions, Amber Arellano joins us now. She leads EdTrust Midwest, which published this new report on Michigan education. Amber, welcome back to the Metro. Let's start with some of the central findings from this report. Michigan ranks in the bottom for how the state funds students from low-income households. First, tell us, how did we end up here?
That's a great question. It's really been decades in the making. When Proposal A was initiated and passed by the Michigan legislature with support from Governor John Engler in the 90s, the vision was to get to equal funding, not necessarily fair funding, but more equal than we had had before as a state, because we have been a state that has unfortunately led the country for how unfairly we fund schools. The differences between, say, a Birmingham and a Pontiac, or a Taylor and a Rochester, it's so stark, and we're one of the states with some of the biggest gaps for working class districts and wealthy districts. And so the vision back in the 90s was to equalize that. Unfortunately, the legislature over many years did not fund the equalization process, essentially, and only just got to that goal just a couple years ago. And so while we've made progress, other states have far surpassed us now for more than 25 years, and we're now at the bottom when it comes to fairness in school funding.
So Michigan has underfunded public education for years, you're saying, even before the pandemic. Why has this pattern persisted across political lines?
It's a really good question. I think that part of it is that, if you think back, and I'm a native Michigander. My family came here from Ireland and Mexico, and they came to work in the auto industry like so many other Michiganders through the generations. And if you think of what we've been through in the last 15 to 20 years, we've really deindustrialized. We've lost a lot of our manufacturing base. We've lost much of our economic base. And so I think for many, many years, the state leaders were just sort of focused on, getting through the next crisis, or getting through this, and figuring out jobs, and figuring out, that. And education just has not been prioritized. The problem is that it hasn't been prioritized now, arguably, for more than 30 years. And so while we were one of the best states for public education in the country, we're now, a pretty stagnant and often declining state. In terms of the pandemic, We're one of the worst of the bottom states in the country for how we're recovering from the pandemic. And that is not a reflection of our students. It is not that our kids are not just as bright and talented and hardworking as other American students around the country, is that we have not created the systems and the conditions for kids and educators to thrive and succeed in their public schools.
So, Amber, would you say that the biggest change between then and now, and I'm talking about from once being the best to the worst, is it because of disinvestment at the state level?
It's not, investment is not a silver bullet, but I think in Michigan's case, it is a huge driver of our challenges. So, for example, there is a really deep link between funding and talent, teacher shortages. We have just a really, really severe teacher shortage problem in the state right now, and it's the most severe in working class and more middle class districts, because those districts don't have the funding to pay competitive salaries. We spoke with teachers around the state over the last couple of years, and this was every region in the state, urban, suburban, rural, about why they're leaving the profession. And over, teachers, again, 20s, 30s, 40s said, I went into this profession because I care about students, I care about schools, I love my job, but I'm not making enough money to save enough to even send my own children to college. I can't afford a middle class living. I have to leave the profession to get a middle class lifestyle and to be able to provide for my family. So, education is talent driven. Our teachers are central to the success of students. And if we don't have the best teachers, we don't have supported teachers in the right conditions, we're going to continue to see churn, rising mobility of teachers leaving the profession, coming and going. That has a really big toll on teacher not only satisfaction, but also for students and their student learning.
And when we talk about teacher retention, Amber, I think about teachers who are working in districts with high concentrations of poverty, and they feel this responsibility often, at least the ones I've spoken with, to try and support their students and go above and beyond. And we're talking about them buying supplies for those students, from school supplies to toiletries. And they're doing this on, as you have noted, a salary that oftentimes is hard for them to make it on. I know that at EdTrust Midwest, you all look at other states in comparison to Michigan. That's pretty central to your work, and which states are doing this well. So what state is doing the best in terms of retaining teachers?
That's a great question. One state that has made great strides in this area is the state of California. California had also been a state that was really known for disinvestment. It started disinvesting in the 70s. It continued in the 80s and 90s. And again, once had been a strong education state and had really, really declined dramatically. About 10 years ago, they passed a new funding formula to create more stability in the teacher profession, to improve the conditions in schools, and to bolster graduation rates and student achievement, especially for students from low-income backgrounds. And they've invested significant dollars more. Way, way more than Michigan is investing now in low-income students. And I think the great news is that it's working. It's actually working. They found that by investment of just an additional $1,000 per pupil for 3 consecutive years, improved students' math and reading achievement, reduce the likelihood of repeating a grade, decrease suspension and expulsions, and decrease the likelihood of high school graduation and career readiness. And meanwhile, teachers, the teacher retainment rate also went up, right? So teachers were more satisfied, staying in the profession, getting more experience, sharpening, their teaching skills. And not surprisingly, students benefited from that. So that is the kind of work that we need to do here.
Before we get into a little bit more of those solutions, I do want to drill down on the numbers a little bit, because I think they're important to note. So in 4th grade reading, Michigan ranks 44th in the nation. In 8th grade math, we're 31st. Now for Black students, the numbers are even worse. Fewer than 1 in 10 are proficient in 7th grade math. what do those numbers tell us about equity in Michigan schools?
Yeah, the gaps in Michigan are frankly devastating. If you look at the gaps compared to, so say we're talking about students with disabilities, Black students, students from low income backgrounds, and you compare them to white students, but especially for students from higher income backgrounds, so the most affluent school districts in the state. And we're talking about differences of a 57% proficiency rate for third grade reading for students from high income backgrounds compared to students with low income backgrounds, about 27%. Those are just devastating gaps. And again, it's such a signal to us, right, that we are not creating the conditions in lower income schools for educators and students to be successful. And when you look at these patterns across the state, it is actually, there's no one region, there's no one city, there's no one racial group. This is happening across the board. It's happening for rural students, it's happening for suburban students, it's happening for small towns, it's happening in big cities, it's happening for white low-income students, Hispanic and Black low-income students. It is a vast socioeconomic challenge that we have. And I think that the kinds of things that have divided Michigan for so many decades in the past, issues of race, I think the challenge, but also the good news in our education crisis is that we're all in this together. There's not one group that's doing significantly better than the other when you look at socioeconomic status, except for very high income students. And so working class, low income students, students who are low income in middle class communities, we're seeing this gap across the board. And it tells us that we've got deep system work to do. We've got statewide work to do. It is not just in one community.
So, Amber, in other words, this is an issue touching schools statewide. And now the backdrop to this issue is that the climate for public education in America is chaotic, given cuts to the Department of Education and its very uncertain future. As briefly as you can, could you say more about that?
Yeah, this is part of the reason why we're putting this report out at this moment, because I don't know in my 20-some years of work in public education in Michigan that we've ever seen a more critical moment for schools and frankly for our country when it comes to our public schools. The Trump administration just released what's called the skinny budget. Late last week, he is proposing $12 billion in cuts to public education. That means drastic cuts for public schools across the board, across the state. And that is, again, really linked to the kinds of programs that we see that have evidence to show that they work, helping kids catch up on reading, for example. You need small groups or one-on-one tutoring. That takes more money. These cuts are going to threaten those kinds of programs. Having enough teachers, qualified teachers in classrooms, funding, and especially federal funding, helps subsidize our local public school budgets. And so when we talk about cuts, we're talking about the potential of hundreds, if not potentially thousands of teachers being laid off from their jobs, class sizes exploding, kids falling behind, teachers not having enough time to spend time one-on-one or in small groups with their students because there's just too many kids that they need to serve. They just don't have the capacity to do it. So this is a really, really pivotal moment. We just led a delegation of Michigan leaders to meet with Michigan congressional leaders on Capitol Hill last week. We're urging Michiganders to reach out to their congressional leaders on both sides of the aisle to let them know to protect public education.
Amber,
yeah,
we're going to run out of time here, and I want to look at those solutions specifically. The report suggests a three-part plan, and that includes investing now, improving transparency, and innovating for the future. As briefly as you can, what does that actually look like in, say, a budget or policy proposal?
It looks like dramatically investing more in low-income students and vulnerable student groups, including students with disabilities. We lag the rest of the country in funding those students as well. But it's not just more funding, it's also improving our systems of transparency and accountability so that Michiganders know they will have confidence in that if they invest more in the system, they're getting their money back in that system, and they know that those dollars are actually reaching their own children's public schools.
In the last 30 seconds that we have here, if Michigan fails to act now, what are the long-term consequences, not just for students, but for the state's future economy and workforce?
You know, when students don't thrive and they're dropping out of high school, or they're graduating from high school without the skills that they need to be successful in careers, it hurts us. It hurts us as a state. Our GDP is hit. We don't have the talent base that we need to fill jobs. So we all lose from that. Our tax base loses, our economy loses. Again, we're in this together. We've got to pull together and work together across political differences, across regions, to really dig deeply and invest more and hold our public schools more accountable.
Amber Arellano, Executive Director for Ed Trust Midwest. Its new report on the challenges facing Michigan schools is titled Meeting the Moment. We'll link to it at WDET.org. I'm Robin Vincent. Thanks so much for listening to The Metro. We'll talk soon.
Metro is hosted by Robin Vincent and Tia Graham. The show is produced by Sam Corey, Kerry Jr. II, and Jack Philbrand. Our senior producer is David Lyons. Our engineer is Nate Bender. Music and creative audio production by Sam Bobian. The Metro is a production of WDET, a listener-supported service of Wayne State University. This is 1019 WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation.